The average human life contains 13 funerals. 12 of them you will attend in the literal sense. In the room, in the chair, in the suit you only wear once a year. The 13th you will attend without a chair, without a room, and without anyone else in attendance. The 13th is the one that rewires you. By the end of this video, you will know which of the 13 you have already attended, which one you are inside right now, and which one is still waiting. The checkpoint will tell you up front. Most people, by the time they sit down to watch a video like this one, have attended 6 of the 13. Some have attended 8. The very young viewers have attended only 3. Almost no one before this video has correctly named the 13th. The checkpoint will inspect each one in order. Before the first funeral is named, one thing has to be said clearly. The number 13 is not arbitrary. It is the average count of meaningful losses in a human life of 75 to 80 years, calculated across modern bereavement studies, longitudinal psychological research, and the checkpoint's own observation across many viewers. Some lives contain more. Some lives contain fewer. The 13 are the categories that almost everyone eventually will pass through. The order matters. The first funerals are usually small. The middle funerals are usually loud. The late funerals are usually quiet. The 13th is silent. The checkpoint will tell you what every funeral is actually for. In the architectural sense, a funeral is not primarily an event for the dead. The dead, by definition, do not attend. A funeral is a station for the living. It is the one moment a culture has built into a life where the survivor is given permission to stop, to feel, and to reorganize the internal map without anyone asking them to be productive. The reason the 13th funeral matters is that it is the only one of the 13 that no culture has built a public station for. So almost everyone attends it alone, late, and unprepared. The checkpoint is here to make sure you attend it on time. Most people never notice this. Funeral 1, the childhood pet. For most viewers, this is the first funeral the body remembers. The dog, the cat, the hamster, the fish that did not survive the second week. The checkpoint will tell you what this funeral is actually for. It is the first time the body learns that something you loved can stop being there. The cargo, the unsayable lesson that the world contains a kind of absence the body had not previously known about. Most parents in the moment miss the size of this one. The child does not. The checkpoint counts it as funeral 1. Funeral 2, the first grandparent. For most viewers, this is the first time a human being who used to be in the room is suddenly not. The checkpoint will tell you what this funeral is actually for. It is the first time the body understands that the people it has built its sense of safety around are not permanent. The cargo, the awareness that the structure of the family, which the child had assumed was a fixed feature of the world, is actually a slow procession of arrivals and departures. Most viewers carry the smell of that funeral, the hymn from that funeral, the room from that funeral, for the rest of their lives, even when they cannot recall the date. Funeral 3, the school friend who left too early. For most viewers, somewhere between 13 and 22, there is one, a classmate, a neighbor, a friend of a friend, an accident, an illness, a decision none of you knew was coming. The checkpoint will tell you what this funeral is actually for. It is the first time the body understands that the rule it had silently believed, that death is for the old, is not a rule. The cargo, the loss of an entire model of the world, the model in which time was guaranteed. After this funeral, the body never quite trusts time the same way again. It pretends to. It does not. Funeral 4, the first parent. For most viewers, this is the first funeral that does not have a survivor on the other side of the room because the survivor is now you. The checkpoint will tell you what this funeral is actually for. It is the moment the body becomes, in a way no one warns you about, the next generation, the cargo, the silent ascension into a position you did not apply for, the role of the older one, the keeper of the story, the one who now answers when the child asks the question. Almost every viewer who has attended this funeral describes the same thing, a strange, disorienting promotion that no one in the room acknowledges. The checkpoint counts it carefully. Funeral 4 is the one where the entire architecture of the family quietly shifts a floor downward, and you, without consenting, are now on the floor your parent used to occupy. Funeral 5, a version of yourself. The checkpoint will pause here because this is the first funeral in the list that is not literal. Somewhere in your 20s or 30s, a version of you ends. The athlete you used to be, the student you used to be, the partner in a particular relationship you used to be, the person who lived in that city with that haircut, with that ambition, with that body, with that energy. The version ends. The body keeps walking. There is no public funeral for this. There should be. The checkpoint will tell you what funeral 5 is actually for. It is the first time the body has to grieve a person who is still alive, yourself. The cargo, the realization that the self is not one continuous person. The self is a sequence of overlapping people, and some of them die without ceremony. Most viewers are still carrying the unburied version somewhere inside them, 10, 15, 20 years later, because no one taught them that this kind of funeral was real. The checkpoint counts it as funeral 5, the first of the silent ones. Funeral 6, a friendship that ended without ceremony. For most viewers, this is the most undergrieved funeral on the list. A friend you would have died for at 23 is, at 37, someone you have not spoken to in 4 years. There was no fight. There was no betrayal. There was a slow, mutual, embarrassed drift. The checkpoint will tell you what funeral 6 is actually for. It is the body learning that some loves end without ending, and that the absence of an event is not the absence of a loss. The cargo, an unmarked grave somewhere in the friendship section of your interior life. Most adults are walking around with 3 or 4 of these. None of them have been attended. The checkpoint counts each of them. They count. Funeral 7, a mentor. For most viewers, in their 30s or 40s, there is one: the teacher, the boss, the older friend, the professor. The first person who looked at you and said, in some language, "I see what you could become." When that person dies, or sometimes when that person turns out to have been less than the version of them you carried, there is a particular kind of loss that the culture does not have words for. The checkpoint will tell you what funeral 7 is actually for. It is the body learning to carry on its own the seeing that another person used to do for it. The cargo, the obligation to become the seer for someone younger because the original seer is no longer available. Most viewers handle funeral 7 badly. They either refuse the obligation or they accept it without understanding what they are stepping into. The checkpoint counts it as funeral 7. It is the funeral that, more than any other, makes you the older one. Funeral 8, the second parent. The checkpoint will say upfront, this funeral is the one that almost no viewer is correctly prepared for, even after attending the first. The first parent's funeral is often devastating but containable. There is still a parent in the world. The second parent's funeral is different. There is no longer a parent in the world. The checkpoint will tell you what funeral 8 is actually for. It is the moment a person becomes, in the deepest structural sense, an adult, because there is no one above them in the lineage anymore. The cargo, a strange, late-arriving freedom that almost everyone experiences as loneliness. Many viewers describe the months after funeral 8 as the loneliest period of their entire life, even when they had not been particularly close to the parent who died. The checkpoint will say it carefully. The loneliness is not about the parent. The loneliness is about the position. There is a chair above you that, for the first time, has no occupant. Funeral 9, appear. Somewhere in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, sometimes earlier, a person your own age, in your own cohort, with your own approximate biography, dies. Not a school friend, not a celebrity. Appear. Someone whose life looked structurally like yours. The checkpoint will tell you what funeral 9 is actually for. It is the body learning, for the first time in a serious way, that the cohort is mortal. The ones you went to school with, started careers with, started families with, are not going to all make it. The cargo, an internal recalculation about how much time is actually left. After funeral 9, almost everyone makes one significant life decision they had been postponing for years. The decision is rarely related to the person who died. The decision is related to the recalculation. The checkpoint has watched this in many viewers. Funeral 9 is the most reliable life decision generator in the entire sequence. Funeral 10, a marriage or a long partnership. Not every viewer attends this one. About half do. The checkpoint will say up front, this funeral can happen through divorce, through death, through the slow disassembly of a long lived-in relationship that, while still technically present, is no longer the same thing it was. The checkpoint will tell you what funeral 10 is actually for. It is the body learning that an entire shared world, the inside jokes, the daily rhythms, the small accumulated furniture of two lives lived next to each other, can end. The cargo, the loss not of one person, but of the version of yourself that only existed in their company. Most viewers, after funeral 10, describe a strange period of not recognizing themselves. The reason is structural. A part of the self had been outsourced to the partnership. When the partnership ends, the part has to be either rebuilt or grieved. The checkpoint counts it as funeral 10, funeral 11, the end of a child's childhood. For viewers who have children, there is a particular mourning, usually somewhere between the child's 18th and 22nd year, when the child in some quiet way leaves. There is no body. There is no service. The child is alive and well. The checkpoint will tell you what funeral 11 is actually for. It is the body grieving daily presence of a person who is still in the world but is no longer in the kitchen. The cargo, the loss of a role, the role of the parent of a present child that you may have been performing for 2 decades. Most viewers describe a strange, hollowing quietness in the first 6 months after funeral 11. The food in the fridge no longer disappears. The shoes by the door no longer rotate. The checkpoint will say it directly. The grief is real. The funeral was real. The fact that the culture refuses to call it a funeral is the entire reason it leaves the parent so alone. Funeral 12. A sibling or the last surviving member of the generation above you. For most viewers, this is the funeral where the generational stack thins to its final layer. The checkpoint will tell you what funeral 12 is actually for. It is the moment the body understands that you are now structurally at the front of the line. The cargo, the realization that the witnesses to your earliest life are running out. The aunt who remembered you as a baby. The uncle who told the story at every gathering. The sibling who shared the original room. After funeral 12, an adult often experiences a period of strange, quiet panic about being unwitnessed, about being the only person who still remembers certain rooms, certain sentences, certain weather from 40 years ago. The checkpoint will say it carefully. The cargo of funeral 12 is not death. It is the loneliness of being the last keeper of a particular set of rooms. Funeral 13. This is the one no culture has built a station for. Here is the real issue. The 13th funeral is the one you attend, alone, for the version of yourself you thought you were going to be, not the version of yourself who died in your 20s. That was funeral 5. The 13th is different. The 13th is the day, somewhere in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, when you realize that the future, you, the 18-year-old you was building toward, is not going to arrive, not because something tragic happened, because the years went where they went, and the future you was always partly fictional, and the actual you that arrived in their place is a different person. The checkpoint will tell you what the mirror funeral is actually for. It is the funeral for the imagined life. The cargo, Every unlived plan, every unbuilt version, every postponed promise the 18-year-old made to themselves about who they would be by now. Almost no one attends this funeral on time. Most people attend it 20 years late in a hospital room when the 13th funeral and the actual death are happening in the same hour. The checkpoint will say what no one usually says. If you attend the 13th funeral while you are still healthy, while you still have time, while you still have years, the funeral becomes the most generative event in your entire life. Because once you have buried the future, you that was never going to arrive, you can finally stop competing with them. And the actual you, the one that did arrive, is finally allowed to live. The checkpoint will inspect why this funeral, of all of them, rewires the person who attends it. The first 12 funerals are losses of someone outside you, or losses of a version of you that has already ended. The 13th is different. The 13th is a loss of someone who was never going to exist at all. The body, when it grieves the unborn future self, releases something it has been carrying for 30 or 40 years, the constant low-grade comparison to a person who, by definition, was never going to show up. The checkpoint has watched this happen. The viewer who attends the 13th funeral on time, at 40, at 50, at 60, describes the same thing afterward. The pressure stops, not the difficulty. The difficulty stays. The pressure of competing with the imagined future, you stops. And in the space where that pressure used to live, almost universally, the actual self, the one that has been quietly there the whole time, waiting for the imagined version to be put down, finally gets a seat. I postponed the 13th funeral for almost a decade. I called it ambition. I called it not giving up. It was neither. It was the refusal to bury the 18-year-old's plan, which had stopped being possible for years before I admitted it. The day I finally held that funeral alone in a chair was the day the checkpoint stopped competing with a ghost. I have watched many viewers carry the unattended 13th into their last hour and try to attend it then. It is too late at that point. The grace is gone from the funeral. The body has nothing left to rewire with. The 13th funeral, attended early, is a gift. Attended late, it is a wound. 13 funerals. The checkpoint has now inspected every one of them. Funeral 1, the childhood pet, the first absence. Funeral 2, the first grandparent, the first impermanent adult. Funeral 3, the school friend who left too early, the first broken rule about time. Funeral 4, the first parent, the first promotion you did not apply for. Funeral 5, a version of yourself, the first silent funeral. Funeral 6, a friendship without ceremony, the first unmarked grave. Funeral 7, a mentor, the first time the seeing becomes yours to do. Funeral 8, the second parent, the first time there is no one above you. Funeral 9, a peer, the first recalculation of how much time is left. Funeral 10, a marriage, the first loss of an outsourced self. Funeral 11, the end of a child's childhood, the first hollowing of a daily role. Funeral 12, a sibling, or the last of the older generation, the first time You are at the front of the line. Funeral 13, the mirror funeral, the funeral for the imagined life. Now count how many you have already attended. The checkpoint is not asking for the polite count. The checkpoint is asking for the count you would write down if no one was watching. Most viewers by their 40s have attended 6, by their 50s, 8, by their 60s, 10. Almost no one before this video has correctly identified which of the 13 they have not yet attended, including the ones that have already passed and gone unmarked. Here is the practice. The checkpoint will say up front, this is a writing practice because the funerals that matter most for the rest of your life are the ones the culture refuses to call funerals, and only the page can hold them. Take a piece of paper or a clean note on your phone. Write the numbers 1 through 13 down the left side. Beside each number, write the funeral. If you have attended it, mark it with a small dot. If you have not, mark it with a small dash. If you attended it but did not actually feel it, the absence of grief is its own kind of unattended funeral. Mark it with a question mark. Now look at the page. The checkpoint has watched what happens at this step. Almost every viewer finds at least one funeral they attended in body but not in feeling. Almost every viewer finds at least one funeral they did not realize was a funeral at all. The practice is to pick one of those, one, and hold the funeral now. Set aside one quiet hour. No phone, no music, no company. Write a short eulogy, 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph, what was lost. The second paragraph, what the loss made possible. The checkpoint has watched what this single hour does to people. It releases a grief that had been compressed inside the body for years. It frees an internal seat that had been silently held by an unattended absence. The eulogy does not need to be shown to anyone. The eulogy is for the survivor. The survivor is you. And if you are honest, and the page tells you that the funeral you have been most refusing to attend is the 13th, the mirror funeral, the one for the version of you that was never going to arrive, then the checkpoint will tell you what the eulogy should be. This is the version of me I was not going to become. I am letting them go now. The version that did arrive is the one I have. They have been waiting for the seat for years. The seat is theirs now. That is the entire practice. That is the practice. The checkpoint has noticed that the unattended funerals are almost impossible to hold inside a phone whose other inputs are designed to keep you running past every absence in your life. Drift Inward is the small private room, the checkpoint built for exactly this kind of inspection, a place to write the eulogy, mark the funeral, and finally let the version of you that was never going to arrive rest. It is not a fix. It is a single quiet page on a device whose other pages are designed to never let the survivor sit down. The ruling: you are not behind. You are carrying a stack of unattended funerals, including the 13th, the one for the version of yourself that was never going to arrive. Hold the funeral now, while you are still healthy, while you still have time. The actual you, the one that did arrive, has been waiting decades for the imagined one to be buried. Bury them tonight. Take the seat.